ever find yourself in a rut of what to eat for dinner? Feel like you're eating the same things over and over again and nothing feels fun? I definitely find myself in that rut, and one of my favorite types of videos to watch on YouTube is what we eat in a week, especially dinners. For some reason, I feel like those are the hardest at times, especially with a big, busy schedule. So this week I'm going to show you what we ate in a week. I actually have 6 meals for you. We did leftovers one of the meals, so I'm not going to show that. But I'm excited to show you what we ate in a week for our family of 7. To start off the week, I am trying something new. So we love sourdough bread here, and we also have a daughter that's sensitive to gluten. So we either have to do sourdough or I can use kamut flour, which is an ancient grain, and she does well with either one of those. But it seems to take such a long time to make sourdough bread. It's just a long process. It's not really hard. It's just kind of long. And so I saw over on Farmhouse on Boone, gave the idea of sourdough bread every day by making a large triple batch of sourdough and shaping it and doing everything you need to with it, and then popping it into your fridge so that you can have bread to pop in the oven really easily. And I am here to tell you, about a week later, I'm doing this voiceover. It was amazing, and I will definitely continue to do this. So each of my bowls, I have 2 large bowls. Each of my bowls is actually 1.5 batches of sourdough. So I need to get 3 loaves or 3 stacks of dough here to make this into 6 loaves of bread. And so what I love to do with this sourdough is laminate it, but it was actually kind of cold. My timing didn't work out exactly, so it had to do its bulk ferment in the fridge. So it didn't really want to laminate all that much, but actually it worked out really great. I was still able to get some great tension built into the sourdough, even though I couldn't laminate it on the counter. I'm trying kind of a different technique for wrapping up the sourdough to kind of help and build that tension. So anyway, you can see here, that's what I'm doing. I do this, I'm going to speed it up for you so it doesn't take forever, but I do this with all 6 loaves. And then I have some Banneton baskets and then a couple of bowls I had to use just because I don't have 6 Banneton baskets. And I put them in the fridge and pulled them out throughout the week, and it was amazing. Day 1, we had grilled cheese and tomato soup. This week, you're going to see that we are not super fancy. I try to make sure that we have healthy, nourishing food, but there's not always vegetables, and we're not really a fancy type of people. So tomato soup and grilled cheese, this is how we like it. So I got this recipe from Trim Healthy Mama. Actually, it's in the Trim Healthy Mama cookbook. So you start out with just, well, I have to 4 times this recipe, so it's kind of up to you, but I'll say what I'm doing here, and then you can make it smaller for your family if you need to. So I put 32 ounces of tomato sauce in here, 4 cups of chicken broth. I have bone broth that I have canned up. And then we use a stevia extract, and so I did 2 dunks of stevia, which is actually ends up being like 1/16 of a teaspoon. And then like 12 generous pinches of salt. So basically, I kind of eyeball it, but that gives you an idea. And then throw some black pepper in there. And we love nutritional yeast. I don't know if you've ever tried it. It's like a cheesy flavor. It's delicious. We put it on popcorn. We put it in our soup. We put it on vegetables. We just put it on everything. So I did 1/4 of a cup of nutritional yeast, mixed that in. And then at the end, I added, 1/2 a cup of heavy whipping cream once it all came to a boil. So I'll show that in just a second. Not really sure. Grilled cheese takes a whole lot of explanation, but I will, I guess, explain a little bit here. So I have bread that I made earlier in the day, and this is just 100% freshly ground kamut flour. So it's a little denser, which isn't always great for sandwiches, but it is amazing for grilled cheese and French toast and things like that. So I am just cutting it up, and then after I cut it up, we'll add the cheese and butter both sides and get to cooking. So we actually have 2 milk cows that I'm milking right now, a Jersey cow and also a Holstein cow. And so this is cheese that I made. It's a Gouda cheese that I made from their milk. And I am still very, very, very new to cheese making. And so it's a little scary. And I definitely have messed up quite a few of them, especially since I switched from hand milking to machine milking. It's been a little bit tricky because there's a lot more to clean on a machine than just a bucket that you're hand milking into. So I'm figuring it out, but this Gouda cheese is like my top favorite of all that I've made. And boy, does it make amazing grilled cheese. Now I'm coming back to that tomato soup, and I'm adding the 1/2 a cup of cream into it. Just kind of helps to give it that creamy, yummy taste. This, in my opinion, it's been a very long time since I had like a can of Campbell's tomato soup, but this is what it tastes like, except for much better. Okay, the next day we had burgers and roasted potatoes and Caesar salad, and oh my gracious, it was so, so yummy. So at the beginning of that day, I started to work on the hamburger buns. Again, either we use sourdough or we just use kamut. And this bun recipe is just from the Food Nannies for the Love of Kamut book. I have tweaked it just a tiny bit, but mostly I follow the recipe out of that cookbook. So I start with 3.5 cups of warm water, 1 cup of oil, 3/4 of a cup of sugar or honey, and 6 tablespoons of active dry yeast. And I mix that up in my mixer, and then I kind of let it proof for about 5 to 10 minutes, just until the yeast looks all bubbly. The next ingredients I add is 3 eggs and then a tablespoon of salt. We use Redmond real salt. You can use whatever kind of salt you'd like. And then about 8 3/4 cup of kamut flour. Now, I think this time I used some freshly ground flour and some white all-purpose kamut flour that I get from the Food Nanny. So it's kind of a mixture, half and half, I think, approximately. And this is where I vary a little bit from what she calls for. I just find that it needs a lot more flour than that. And so I start out by adding 8 3/4 cups of flour. I usually add a little bit more while it's mixing, and then I let it sit. Since it's freshly milled flour, letting it sit kind of lets all of the liquids absorb. And then I can add more when I'm kneading it on the counter and rolling it out, which is generally what I do. Later in the week, you're going to see that I share my Stromboli recipe. And of all the recipes that I share, that is probably the one I get asked the most for the recipe. And so it's interesting because it actually starts as a hamburger bun recipe in the book that I follow, where I originally found it. And I think just one time it was the dough that I could very quickly get done. Like there's no rise time or anything hardly. So it's very convenient to do the day of. It's not like sourdough where you have to kind of think a day or two ahead of time. So right here, I'm actually going to portion off some of this and pop it in the freezer for Stromboli later in the week. And then I'll make hamburger buns from this right now. This dough is extremely versatile and it also does amazingly in the freezer. So I usually, if I don't need it all right now, I will usually portion it off and put it in the freezer. And then it's very simple to just pull out, leave on the counter. It'll be nice and thawed and you can have homemade bread in no time at all. And that's kind of a trick that I have for when I am doing things in the kitchen is I don't do it just for that moment. I usually make a very large batch that we can either have leftovers the next day. I usually send leftovers in my kids' school lunches, or I can just pop it in the freezer so that on a busy day when it would be convenient to go by the drive-thru, we, one, don't have to pay the money for drive-thru, and two, don't have to worry about the lack of nutrition in drive-thru food. So I'm making my own drive-thru convenience food by doing things in large batches all at once. For my hamburger buns, I generally just use a wide mouth ring for a mason jar, and that seems to be the perfect size for these hamburger buns. I don't have a fancy cutter, just use what I have. Generally, I just pop the pan of hamburger buns onto the stove while I preheat the oven, and when the oven is preheated, then I just slide them in. So these need to cook at 425, and I think it's around 5 to 7 minutes. You're supposed to switch it and do 5 minutes on the top and 5 minutes on the bottom, but because I have a double oven, I don't have 2 racks on the bottom. So I just kind of generally do about 7-ish minutes, and it seems to be perfect. Next up is our roasted potatoes. I do a ton of oven roasting of vegetables. And if you watched my video last week, which I'll leave a link to that video in the description down below, but I canned these potatoes, and I know it's kind of killer to can them and then use them right away, but I kind of wanted to show you guys what it was like and how simple it was to use. So you just pop the lid on the potatoes and dump them out on your sheet. I use foil because my pans are kind of old and icky. So the foil kind of saves the pans and saves scrubbing time for us. We used 2 quart-sized jars of potatoes this evening. And if you watched the video before, you know I put a little bit of lard and salt and pepper on these, but I'm going to season them up a little bit more. I used some oil and then onion and garlic powder, paprika, and a little bit of nutritional yeast. And then I just popped them back in the oven at 425 since that's what the oven was on for the hamburger buns. You don't have to do it that high, but I was kind of like wanting to get stuff done quickly. You know how that is at dinner time. So these potatoes are fully cooked and soft. So all they have to do is crisp up, which is the absolute wonderfulness of canning potatoes. It's so fast and you have such a yummy side for any dinner or even breakfast. We love to do it at breakfast too. So tonight I'm using the last bit of the Gouda cheese that we have, and then I also have a red pepper flake Gouda that I'm using and slicing for burgers, which is so yummy. It's like pepper jack, but I think pepper jack has jalapenos, and this is red pepper flakes. And then chopping up some romaine lettuce for our Caesar salad. The Caesar dressing that I already mixed it up, and so I don't have a video portion of that, but it's from Venison for Dinner, and it's legit my favorite Caesar salad dressing ever. Dan seasons our burgers with just salt and pepper and cook them outside because it gets rather smoky inside. While things are cooking, if I can, I try my hardest to wash up dishes. Boy, does it help after dinner is done to get some of those bigger things hand washed. Of what we do at dinner time is actually putting everything from dinner out on the island, and then either everyone serves themselves or we serve up the plates, depending on what it is. Usually we help the little people, and then the older three can kind of get their own. When you have 5 kids, this tends to be just the fastest way to do it. I think when we moved into this house, this kitchen had like 0 counter space, only the counter that was over by the kitchen sink. So this is technically a dresser, not the most ideal, and we need to add a countertop surface to the top so I can actually do things directly on it. But for now, it's probably the most used piece in my kitchen. It gets used for so many things. Next, you're going to see our ChickfilA Night. We have a family night once a week, and usually it's homemade pizza or ChickfilA Night, as we call it. Tonight, it's ChickfilA Night. So what we're going to do is chop up our chicken, and I'll show you the little mixture that we put here in this bowl. So I do about 2 cups of all-purpose kamut flour in the bowl, and then I have a mixture of a bunch of seasonings, and I'm pretty sure I have a picture of that I'll overlay here, but it's just a mixture of different kinds of seasonings, Parmesan cheese, nutritional yeast, parsley, stuff like that I put in here, and I use about a cup, apparently a heaping cup, and then I tend to add a little more salt because I feel like it needs a little more salt. And then we have some of our home-raised chicken here, and so I just chop that all up, and I make a milk and egg wash, which is about 2 cups of milk and 2-ish eggs. I don't really think it matters all that much. Just use what you have, less or more, it doesn't matter. And then we have an outdoor fryer that we like to fry this in, and it makes it so delicious. I'm telling you, my kids like it better than Chick-fil-A. It's crazy. So we just run the chopped chicken nugget pieces through the egg and milk wash and then into the seasoning blend, and then we use a little strainer to kind of get off any excess flour. Usually I'll just use chopped potatoes and we'll fry them like that, but I found a bag of frozen crinkle cut fries. Good old Great Value. And so we're using those, and the oil we're using is actually lard that I processed from a local farm. I bought some pork fat and rendered that down myself, and so it makes an amazing frying oil for the chicken and also for the French fries. Oh, it's so delicious. I wish you could smell it. So yummy. We also make our own Chick-fil-A sauce for this night, and I'll post both of the recipes again right here just so that you can pause it and see. I'm sorry for my chicken scratch, but that's just how, when we figure stuff out, I just handwrite it down in our favorites recipe book. Now, this next meal is a family favorite, but I will be the first to say it takes a lot of work. So I start with a whole chicken. This is one of our homegrown chickens, and I love this lemon pepper seasoning by Redmond Real Salt. So I just do a little olive oil and a little bit of this seasoning and then pop it from the roaster into the oven. And just get that going, and I will save the bones to make bone broth later and pick all of the chicken off of it to put into our chicken Alfredo. I forgot to take a video of me actually mixing up this sourdough pasta. So it's already done, but it's real simple. This is a double batch, but in a single batch, you would use 3 egg yolks, 250 grams of starter. You can use active sourdough starter or discard, 19 grams of water, 235 grams of flour, and then just 1 teaspoon of salt. You mix it all up together and get it into a ball. And then if it's active sourdough starter, you can put it straight in the fridge. If it's discard, you leave it on the counter for a couple of hours and then into the fridge for a couple of hours. So I made the pasta earlier in the day, and then my oldest daughter, and I think eventually some of my younger kids joined in too, but my oldest daughter has done pasta quite a bit, so she is taking charge of that. And all you have to do is just roll it in balls, and it's good to keep each thing floured so that then we can roll it through our little pasta maker. We have just a hand crank pasta machine, and we roll it through starting on the number 7, and then I think we jump down to 5 and then 3. Sometimes we go straight from 7 to 4, and then that's as thin as we want it. It really just depends on how thick or thin you want your pasta. While the kids are working on the pasta, I'm going to go ahead and get started on the Alfredo sauce. I have no exact recipe for you. I am very terrible about just winging it. That's the kind of cook that I am. So I'm trying to be better about that because people ask me for recipes and then I can't reproduce it at all. So I start with a stick of butter, and then I think I ended up adding this entire quart of cream and probably about 5 or 6 cloves of garlic that I minced and threw in there. First, I add the garlic to the butter, and then I add the cream, and then I season the cream with, I'm pretty sure that I just used salt and white pepper, and then just a little bit of Italian seasoning blend that I got from Azure Standard. And then Parmesan cheese right at the end, melt it all together. And the amazing thing about cream is you can let it kind of simmer down and it thickens itself. And so you just got to kind of go low and slow and kind of taste it and own it, But after I finish this cream then I'll start adding in all of the chicken and the pasta and the broccoli that's in the oven. I don't think I actually even got any video of the broccoli, but I oven roasted some broccoli with onion and garlic powder, salt and pepper, nutritional yeast. That's kind of like my base for everything. So once that's done, we just start adding everything all together. It seems like we always have a volunteer to want to turn the crank on the pasta machine to cut the pasta. So that's what they're working on right now. There's a thinner pasta setting, but it kind of, at least what I've done so far, it's kind of turned to mush. So I like this thicker, almost like fettuccine style of cutting. My husband there with the iron is actually ironing the bits of pasta because it dries it out, and then the pasta does not stick together when you're trying to cook it immediately. And that has been an issue that I've had for a little while. So for the focaccia bread, I'm kind of cheating and using one of the sourdough bowls that I already rolled up and had perfectly ready to just throw in the oven. I decided, because I didn't have time to make any other bread, that I would just squish it into this pie pan and drizzle with olive oil, a little garlic powder, and then my daughter ran out to the garden and grabbed some rosemary, and I cut that up really small and put it on top. And while it kind of turned out a little thicker than normal focaccia bread, it was so delicious. Oh my goodness, I would totally do this again. You could top it with anything, actually. Just the other night, we all had a sweet tooth, and so I took one of the breads and squished it down like this and drizzled it with some coconut oil and then some sucanat and some cinnamon. And it was like dessert bread. And we all had a mug of hot cocoa. So anyway, the bread is super, super versatile. Dan is very good at deboning a chicken. It's probably my least favorite thing to do. And he's always so willing to jump in and help. And I'm so thankful for that. So he's deboning that chicken while I am working on checking the focaccia bread, and the broccoli in the oven is done, and getting the pasta boiling. Like I said, it's a huge family team effort to get this meal on the table. With bread, it's really a good idea to get a little thermometer like this, because if your bread is over 190 degrees, then you know the inside is done. So it'll kind of save you the guesswork with that. So focaccia bread is done. I'm going to pull that out, and the broccoli I'm going to add straight to the Alfredo sauce, and then we'll start adding everything all together. This meal turned out absolutely deliciously divine. I would choose it over Olive Garden any day of the week. And this focaccia bread, oh, seriously, so good. Also, if you have an electric bread knife, it will become your best friend with sourdough, because sometimes it can be tricky to cut warm sourdough, but this thing is awesome. Yay, family favorite is also Stromboli and chocolate milk. I know it seems really strange to have chocolate milk with Stromboli, but somehow they just taste delicious together. Usually we also have popcorn. I air pop popcorn, and we use, again, nutritional yeast and salt and butter. But our popcorn maker was not working on this day, so we just did Stromboli. And remember, at the beginning of the video, this is the hamburger bun dough that I had thrown into the freezer. So I just let it thaw, and then we're going to roll it out and add all of our toppings. We usually keep this pretty simple with just pepperoni, mozzarella cheese, and Parmesan cheese. And then I just roll it up like a giant cinnamon roll, as you can see. And then I kind of measure my pan and cut it to make sure that it will fit. And then we bake it at 350 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes, depending on your stove. Pizza sauce is easy to make too. We have pizza seasoning from Azure. Add it to some tomato sauce, a little sugar, and you're good to go. All right, so chocolate milk. This is how we like to make ours. So I take half a cup of hot water, half a cup of cocoa powder, half a cup of sugar, then a little dash of vanilla and salt, mix it all together and add it to a gallon of milk, and it makes the most delicious, not overly sweet chocolate milk, and it's such a fun treat to have. Those of you who are truly from Philly, don't hate me, because you're probably like, these are not cheesesteaks, but they're our best take on it here in Virginia. So I made the sourdough French bread the night before, and this recipe is from Farmhouse on Boone. So it is technically a French bread recipe, and I decided to try and make it into like individual little sandwich, like hoagie buns. It didn't really turn out. They almost looked like more like breadsticks, I think, but we made it work. It seemed to be okay. So I started them the night before, and then the next day shaped them and let them rise some more, and then sliced them on the top, and then started working on the inside of our Philly cheesesteaks. So I'm just taking peppers and onions and frying it up in oil, adding a little salt and pepper. And then with the meat, it's just this really thinly shaved steak that I got from the grocery store. So I don't know that you could do any kind of meat. I'm assuming maybe even ground beef. And I just added a little bit of butter and Worcestershire sauce, however you say that. And then used a little Montreal steak seasoning that I get from Azure Standard again, and fried it all up and chopped it really small until it was done. And then because we have small kids, we decided that we would actually just do meat and cheese for some of the little guys, and then everybody else got the peppers and onions and the meat and cheese. And then we slid them into the oven and let it get all toasty, and it was so divine. Oh, and I did also put mayonnaise, just a light layer of mayonnaise on the bread. It was so good. So I said 6, that I had 6 meals to share. I forgot that I took a little tiny video of this. So we have Nacho Night every Sunday night with Andy Griffith. So meat, beans, taco seasoning, heat it up, and then get your favorite taco toppings, cheese, lettuce, sour cream, hot sauce, salsa, whatever you want. And that is the end of our week. We love it. It's a family tradition. I hope that we were able to give you some ideas on meal inspiration for you to try this week. And just remember, anyone can homestead, and it usually starts in your kitchen. That's it for this week, guys. We'll see you next week. Thanks for stopping by.